Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Biblio Files, a show from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan that's all about books. Each episode, we answer one book-related question in just a few minutes, and this time we're answering the question, what's a great retelling of fairy tales? My name is Christopher, and I'm joined as always by Amanda and Lucy. Amanda, what did you pick for us this time?
So when we first had this topic, I didn't know what to pick or what to read because I don't feel like I read a lot that fall within this category. And I was trying to find something new to read, but then I remembered a book I read a long while ago that I absolutely loved. And so I grabbed it and I am enchanted by it all over again. The book is The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. And it was actually published in 2006, and I read it probably a couple years after it came out. It is an adult fiction book, and it is set in World War II in London. There's a young boy named David, and he's 12, and his mother has died, and he is grief-stricken, and he lives with his father, and he's grief-stricken. He doesn't know what to do with his grief. One of the things that he did with his mother when she was sick and on her way out was they would read together. And even though David was 12 and all grown up, he still enjoyed reading fairy tales and folk tales and stories of mythical beasts and mythical lands. And it was sort of an escape for him. And so after she dies, he starts hearing the books on his walls speak out loud to him. He's going through a lot. He's severely grief stricken, and this is one of his coping mechanisms. So the book is heavily rooted in fantasy, but it is not light at all. It is dark, it is gruesome, it is grim. And it's not a strict retelling of one particular fairy tale. There are characters and worlds plucked from all of these books on his walls that are sort of strewn throughout the book and in the land that David ends up going to. So while he's hearing these voices, eventually, like his father remarries and she's expecting a baby. That's another huge blow to David and his world and his mental capacity. And one evening he hears his mother's voice calling to him. So he heads toward the garden. There's a hole in the wall in the garden. He goes through it and the door seals, and he is in this storyland, bookland, if you want to call it that. But it's not light, it's very dark. And while he's there, he first encounters the Crooked Man. And the Crooked Man is the most evil. Talk about making a deal with the devil. That is what happens in this book. You've got the Crooked Man who's making deals. There's also some bits of humor. One of my favorite chapters, and I was rereading it this morning, was his encounter with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, who are very unlike what you have read about them or heard about them when you were younger or through watching your kids experience these things now. One of the funny, it's just hilarious, but one of my funny quotes I like from it is when David is talking to the dwarfs. David says, and what about happily ever after? Asked David a little uncertainly. What does that mean? Eaten quickly, says one of the brothers. So it's just like these, it's really funny. I was laughing out loud while I was reading it again this morning. So there are bits of humor throughout it, but you do have this young boy who misses his mother and is struggling with his new family structure. And how is he supposed to cope with this fairy tale world and then reality? There are doctors who are trying to help him. So in essence, it's a coming of age tale, but it's dark. It's blood and guts and gore and kidnap and murder and vengeance. So it is an adult fiction book. It's funny because when I went to grab it, I thought for some reason when I read it, it was a teen book. And then I grabbed it and I was like, oh, it's actually filed under adult. Okay. Which is a good spot for it because it is dark and treacherous. So, and I am fascinated a little bit with the idea of the Crooked Man in like English nursery rhymes. So it was fun to see the Crooked Man, walk his crooked mile and do his crooked horrible things in this book. So I really enjoyed it, and I want to read the entire book again instead of plucking chapter by chapter again to get ready for today's episode. The author does a phenomenal job with the writing. You're just engrossed and you're there with David and in this world, and you are feeling those gut punches to his heart and to his soul as he's trying to just get through daily life while battling the Crooked Man and the Woodsman and meeting all of these characters throughout the woods. So that is The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. Lucy, what did you pick for today?
Well, before I tell you, that book sounds really good. Like I really want to read that right now. So anyway, I mine's more of a folk tale, I guess, or folklore. But the book that I read is called Legend Born, and it is a newish book, came out in 2021 by Tracy Dion. It's a young adult book, and it is a take on the Arthurian legend. So it's sort of the story of the Knights of the Round Table, except that it is in current time. It takes place in the US. It still has its origins like in Wales, but the more recent generations of the Knights of the Round Table are Americans. It takes place at the University of North Carolina, and there's a 16-year-old named Bree, and she is there at UNC as part of this early college program. She's also still reeling from her mother's very recent death. And when she gets to the early college program at UNC, there's some kind of strange events that start bringing back feelings and occurrences that she had around her mother's death. And then you take like the idea of the Arthurian legend and the Knights of the Round Table, and then you take a place like UNC, which is very old and does in fact have a lot of secret societies, and you combine those two things. And so one of the secret societies is actually like they're called the Legend Born, but they're like the descendants of Arthur and Lancelot and Gawain. And so they are also on the precipice of war. The knights are calling back these descendants to fight who are called the Shadowborn, which are like these demons, these evil demons. So Bree enters into this mostly trying to figure out her mother's death, but she also becomes close to Nick, who is the descendant of Arthur, and therefore Nick is the once and future king. So what makes this story so brilliant, among other things, is Bree is African American. So if she traces her lineage back in this country, she gets back to enslaved people. And race is a big and important part of the story because she's at this place, UNC, where the author actually was a twice graduate, undergrad and graduate school, which is, in part built by enslaved people. And a lot of people who went there initially would have had slaves as well. So there's a really complicated history, and there are these secret societies there. So you take these two legacies and you combine them in a story, and you realize if you're putting the legend of Arthur into US history, it's going to have to reflect, or you can't separate it from the legacy of slavery, right? Because that's part of US history, especially at a place like UNC. So Bree starts to go back into her lineage, and she realizes that her descendants are involved in something called rootcraft, which has its origins in Africa, and then African Americans started to practice it as well. So these stories are kind of parallel, but they're kind of combined, and the author is doing a really good job of sort of subverting the whole Arthurian legend, and also underscoring the point that there's like many different ways to convey folklore, and that different cultures have different stories that they tell. So the author says like she wanted to address intergenerational trauma experienced by descendants of enslaved people, and the ways that trauma can manifest between parents and children, and the legacies of racial trauma and oppression and resilience. And she does show that by like there's Confederate monuments at the school. There is a lot of situations where Bree, the main character, is moving through white spaces. Like for instance, in this secret society, she's really one of two, I think, people of color. And the author again said that this was a pretty common experience for her growing up in the South. As a Black person growing up in the South, you end up in a lot of spaces that just aren't meant for you. And so I thought it was a really interesting way to take an old story that is well known and put it in a different place and combine it with another different kind of old story and legacy. And it also, in the midst of all this, it has romance, it has tryouts for squires to become, or for people to become squires to knights. It has Merlins in it. Each like Legendborn person has a Merlin who sort of protects them. There's fighting of demons. There's the Shadowborn. There's all this rootcraft. So it's really, really well written on top of that. So that is like, there's a lot packed in there, but I was sort of blown away by what a great job this author did, taking something like the Knights of the Round Table and being true to it, but also subverting it at the same time. So that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Christopher, what do you have for us?
Well, both of those sound like such great books. I think this will be a really fun episode. I ended up choosing one of my all-time favorite books. This was a book that I discovered from a sort of doomed book club where we read a lot of stuff that no one liked, but I did discover The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This came out in 1979, and it's a short story collection, and it's a retelling of lots and lots of traditional fairy tales. This is not my favorite edition. I have an older copy that I just love. However, the new edition does have an introduction by Kelly Link, who is also one of my favorite authors, as you might know. There's another link back to a prior episode of Bibliophiles in that I learned Angela Carter was a tutor of Kazuo Ishiguro, which is kind of an interesting connection to a prior episode. So the stories in this book include retellings of Bluebeard, Puss in Boots, Beauty and the Beast. There are werewolf stories, there's a vampire story, and lots of other ones. So Carter's language is so rich and lush, and even, I would say, dense at times. There are lots of catafalques, lots of chinoiserie, escritoires, and things like that. So this may send you to the dictionary more than once, and that's great. I really miss reading books where there are some new words that you may or may not know, or that you want to clarify for yourself. Her writing style is all her own, in my opinion. I'm certainly not knocking Wicked. That is a fun, fast book to read, but Carter's style is so much different from that. I would not call this a fun, fast beach read. This is a very dreamlike, evocative, even romantic collection of stories that I just love so much. But it does require a little bit of time, even though the book is so slim at 160 pages. There are wonderful versions. I don't know if version is the right word, or maybe reimaginings is a better word, of so many of these stories. How many times do you read a fairy tale where someone's mother comes to rescue the heroine of the story? Never. Well, that happens in The Bloody Chamber. One of my all-time favorite stories, though, is called The Lady of the House of Love, which is a vampire story. And just her description of this soldier on furlough riding a bicycle has always stuck with me, really, since I first read this story so long ago. It's so beautiful. And that whole telling is so sad and lovely. I could obviously go on and on about her writing style and what these stories mean to me, but they're just wonderful. That is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. So we've got a lot of great recommendations today, and we would love to know what you're reading as always. And if you have any great recommendations for retold fairy tales or folk tales, take care.